Hello and welcome back to the Edition podcast. I'm sorry I wasn't here last week. I was pretty under the weather and didn't think any of you needed 30 to 40 minutes of me just coughing. I have a wonderful guest this week. I have the mighty Jack Pitt-Brooke from The Athletic, who covers the Tottenham Hotspur men's team and the England men's team at that publication. Normally it's Christmas that's the most wonderful time of the year. Whereas for football journalists, January is the most wonderful time of the year because it's that frantic, exciting transfer window. Jack, welcome back to the show. I'm thrilled to have you here.
Hey, Charlotte. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
No, it's great to have you. This is the point where you tell me you've got loads of news stored up. My football team's going to sign loads of fantastic players, and you've been frantically taking notes and speaking to sources.
I wish I could come and reel off a long list of players that Tottenham are about to sign. But no, I think that it's always a difficult window, the January window. I think that, so much work goes in behind the scenes just to get any signing over the line. And I think Tottenham will do more between now and the end of the window. I think just because, the team obviously needs more players. I think everyone at the club is really, really aware of that. And they've shown already this window that they can move quickly, as they did in the case of Conor Gallagher. But at the moment, I think it's just a case of they've got to figure out which of their targets are actually gettable and then try to get them over the line as briskly. And I think increasingly now, I think with Tottenham, as kind of discreetly as they can, because they know that external noise is not always conducive to getting the players you want in at this time of year.
Well, and you are that external noise. So let's unpack that process a bit, because it doesn't have to be club specific, because all clubs are trying to get business done. What is it like as a journalist, in your instance, assigned to cover one particular club? What is that process of trying to keep up with the comings and goings in this, particularly the January transfer window? I feel like the summer is a bit different. This very intense 4-week period, what's that like for you?
That's a good question. It's kind of intense because, there's a lot of ultimately a lot of public focus, fans and readers and listeners really, really are really engaged by who's going to sign for their teams in the window. So there's a lot of, that people are really, really kind of watching, and they particularly if you work for a publication like The Athletic or, another big publication, there's people want to come to you guys to find out what's going on. So you do feel, I guess, a little bit under the microscope, which I think is good as well, because, you want people to be reading and listening and tuning in, and you want people to be coming to you for the news. So yeah, it's quite high pressure. It can move very quickly. That's the other thing, is that ultimately, the Gallagher thing, brilliant colleague David Ornstein broke that story, I think, on the basically towards the start of this week. I get my days a bit confused at this time of year.
Yeah, apparently we're recording this apparently on a Friday.
On a Friday, yeah. So my laptop says top right-hand corner, Friday, 16th of Jan. But I can see the Gallagher story is one that moved very quickly from being there wasn't an awful lot of talk about Tottenham even being interested in Gallagher. And then clearly it moved very quickly. And David, as ever, was massively across the process. And then all of a sudden, he was flying in from Madrid to London for his medical the next day. To join. And clearly, Tottenham, that was one of those deals where Spurs had moved, I think, very, very quickly in private. And then by the time it was publicly known, I think it was pretty close to being done. So there is I think that is illustrative of the fact that things can move really fast. And so there's a kind of, you need to be able to move quickly and to react when news breaks or when you get wind of a player who's on the move.
Presumably, these stories tend to break when you're out having dinner with your family, trying to put your daughter to bed.
Yeah.
Whenever is the most inconvenient. I assume this is when the stories break.
Yeah, that is often the way. Fortunately, at The Athletic, we've got a big team of amazing colleagues, both kind of other reporters and editors and so on, and therefore there's often other people you can work with if you are not able to work for any particular reason. Stories do often happen at inconvenient times. It was only a few months ago. I was at Lord's for One Day International, England against South Africa, with my dad for his birthday, and then about I think it was about 5 p.m. I got a call from the desk, which I ignored, thinking, they know I'm at the cricket today. I'm
It's a day
not
off,
going to
yeah.
take not going to take a call about work at 5 p.m. And then my phone exploded as I saw that Daniel Levy had been sacked as chairman.
Yeah, so this was the chairman of Tottenham Hotspur for a quarter of a century, a
Yeah,
hugely influential figure. It was a very big deal, him moving. I think I remember seeing you post on Instagram your lovely view from
yeah.
Lords,
That was fun.
and then had to run, and presumably, did you have to write a story on your mobile phone?
I didn't do any writing on my phone. I think we had people to cover that, but I did basically get the tube back to South London as quickly as possible, and then come home, and then it was kind of non-stop work for what felt like about a month until we kind of started to get our heads around what had happened and why.
Yeah, it's interesting. On the last episode, I had Emma Sanders on, the BBC's senior women's football news reporter, and she was sort of saying the same thing. There is something about, I think, sports and politics reporting are actually quite similar in this way, that the off days are quite random and quite sporadic, and you might have a very intense period and then a very quiet period. And I
Yeah,
think
totally.
it's
And
quite
also,
an interesting way.
so I was thinking yesterday, when Robert Jenrick got sacked and then defected
Right,
to Reform. I mean, I wonder if if you're a politics reporter, you might have gone into yesterday morning not really expecting there to be, like a colossal UK politics story, even putting aside all the other very, very newsworthy stuff that's happening in the news at the moment, but,
sure.
particularly in other countries, but you might not have expected the Conservative Party to set itself on fire yesterday morning, and then all of a sudden this massive thing happens, and then it dominates the whole day, and so
Yeah.
and that's just the way of it, I guess.
Yeah, I wrote, I had a couple of stories about that covering Robert Jenrick in the latest newsletter. And yes, I can tell you from having spoken to a few of the people in the Westminster lobby, they rather enjoyed themselves yesterday.
Yeah, I bet.
They quite like a good old fashioned pure politics story. And I think they all had quite a good time yesterday. And it's interesting, just coming back to the football transfers as opposed to the political transfer market, that there seems to be two types of ways these stories develop. The sort of sagas. I'm thinking Mark Gahey leaving Crystal Palace. I'm thinking Antoine Semenyo leaving Bournemouth, where we've watched 3 of his last games, but all the journalists know he's on his way out and keep asking the manager. And they have to ask the manager, and the manager can't say anything, and it's all a bit of a farce that everyone is dancing around. And the journalists are sort of covering this saga for week after week after week. Or there's the kind of explosion as you sort of, oh yeah, right, Conor Gallagher's here, and now he's going to Spurs. There's lots of other stories from lots of other clubs. How do they differ, the way you cover those two different types of developing transfer story? Because,
Yeah.
I mean, the teams you cover have managed to be involved in both.
That's true. I guess I mean, there are some, I guess, so there's the sort of first example, the one where you know that something is going to happen. Usually that will be because of a player's contractual situation, which means that um, if you know, right, so it's like Gahey's a perfect example, right? Like Gahey's nearly left Palace like 4 times or something, I think, in the last 2 or 3 years. But that's because he had a contract. He's coming to the end of his contract. That contract now has 6 months left, and therefore, there's always a lot of pressure on Palace to sell him because it's the last thing they can make money, and therefore you always know that he's going to be on the market, and so it's always going to be a big talking point. And that's been the case. And I guess from a Tottenham perspective, there's not really been. I guess
Well,
I
you had
mean,
to deal with 3 years of Harry Kane leaving.
that's true. With Kane, there was never. I mean, Kane's an interesting one, right? Because there was a lot of talk about him going to City in the summer of 2021. Nothing really in the summer of 2022, and then in 2023 he did in fact go to Bayern Munich. Whereas with Son, for example, I think it was kind of quite widely known from the end of last season, even though the option year was taken by
Yeah.
Tottenham, which meant that he was contracted for what would have been this season, that it was probably going to come to a parting of ways in the summer, which of course is what happened.
So having followed like that Harry Kane. So how do you keep going back to these stories, finding something new to say? You know, either there might not be new developments, but your editor's always going to want something because everyone knows it's a big story that the fans are interested in. You know, same with your colleagues that cover Bournemouth with Antoine Semenyo. We could list loads of players where this has happened. How do you keep that interesting as a journalist, both for you and the audience, frankly?
Yeah, it's a good question. It definitely can get boring. It definitely. I mean, I think there were definitely moments in the Kane to City saga 2021 where it did get boring. But the reason it got boring is because or the main reason it got boring is because nothing was happening.
Yeah.
It's not like a saga where, like, particularly after he came, you know, he kind of was late back for training and then he came back and then it was kind of obvious for a while that City weren't going to bid. That's when it becomes really boring, right? Because you're chasing you're chasing developments, but there are no developments.
Right.
Everybody knew that summer from probably frankly fairly early on. He was just not going to go to City. Like, City were not going to bid enough to make Daniel Levy think twice about it, and that can get a bit dull. Whereas at least, like, at least if you've got one of those sagas, I don't know, like Isak to Liverpool or whatever, at least in that case there were like bids going in, and then he had his little strike and everything.
The
It's
story
when
was moving.
Yeah, exactly. It's where it's the combination of like high interest and a story where literally nothing is happening, like the sort of stalemate story, that can get a little bit boring.
Yeah, and I guess particularly at a sport publication, you know, where that is all what you guys do at The Athletic, you have to keep on top of these things, even if there's nothing actually changing in reality.
Yeah, exactly. It's when nothing's changing at all, but you know that, like, and like kind of understandably, like from a sort of public perspective, but also like editorially, there's always, you know, like, what's the latest on this? What's the latest on that? And I think that actually I've got a lot of respect for journalists who are able to make it look as if there is something happening when in fact there's not. I don't mean, and by that I don't mean making stuff up. I just mean like phrasing nothing happening in a way which you can still like turn into a news story to go onto the back page. So, for example, let's say hypothetically, I mean, let's just use Kane as an example because we're talking about Kane. If you were still at Tottenham and you knew nothing was happening, but if you wrote a story that was like, Tottenham braced for new Man City offer, like,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that Man City have made another offer. It just means it doesn't mean nothing, but it just means like the top of a news story, which is not actually saying what's happened. It's just saying like Tottenham are
Because
ready.
nothing has happened.
Ready in case Manchester City were to bid. Tottenham resolute in case there's another Man City offer. Or Tottenham resolute towards like prospects of a future Man City bid. You're not reporting an event. You're kind of but you've done a news story which is you know, kind of can go on the back page of a newspaper or the front of like a newspaper website, even though there hasn't been like a solid event. And so I think there is always an art, I think, journalistically, to writing stories when there has not been, well, you're not writing about an event as such, but you're still kind of turning a kind of non-event into a news story.
And some of that, of course, has to come from your sourcing. You've got to be talking in these particular parts of the season, these few weeks, you've got to be talking to your sources, you know,
All the
day
time.
in, day out.
Yeah, you have to be really annoying. You have to be annoying to be like, you know, messaging the same people all the time. Has anything happened on this? Has anything happened on this? And it's the same with transfer or sacking, whatever. Like, has he been sacked today? Has he been sacked today? Has he been sacked
Is
today?
he being sacked tomorrow?
Yeah, is he? And eventually, like, and you ask, you know, 100 times the answer will be no, and then the 101st time the answer will be yes. And I guess sort of like professionally, you just have to not worry about being annoying, basically, or we have to like keep being annoying, and because it's, as you know, as a reporter, being annoying is often your job.
Yeah. Again, you're giving me political comparisons and flashbacks. I remember reporting and covering the 2015 general election, and basically every single day I had to phone the same people in the same press offices to check what their announcements were for the day after, to put it on the front page of the newspaper.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure having me phone at the same time every single day was annoying to the press office, but that's, as you say, that is your job. Who cares?
Yeah,
You've got
yeah.
and you've got to speak to your sources out campaigning and all of
Totally.
that. And it's a very similar thing, actually. I've never really thought of actually how close political and sports reporting can sometimes echo each other. There's so much more I want to ask you, but first I have to thank our sponsor, MacPaw. This week's episode is sponsored by Clean My Mac. I'm thrilled they're supporting the show. I'm a big fan of the product. I've used it for years. Clean My Mac is your ultimate solution for Mac control and care. It's notarized by Apple and meticulously crafted by my friends at MacPaw. It offers features such as the new cloud cleanup tool that connects to your accounts on iCloud, OneDrive, Google Drive, and it scans the cloud to find large space wasters, synced and unsynced files, both in cloud storage and on device. All that scanning happens locally on your Mac, so your data stays safe. There's also the cleanup and my clutter features, which are what I've used to keep my Macs going strong longer than they probably should. These tools remove system cache, development junk, and unnecessary files that take up space and prevent essential update. I'm a big fan of cookies. I ate quite a lot of them over Christmas. But the wrong kind of cookies slow down your Mac. So use Clean My Mac to get a fresh start this January. Get tidy today. Try 7 days free and use my code ADDITION in uppercase for 20% off at clnmy.com/addition. That's clnmy.com/addition, all in uppercase. ADDITION in uppercase. Thanks to Clean My Mac for supporting the show. I'm here with The Athletic's Jack Pitt-Brooke. We're talking all things covering the transfer window, which we are in the midst of as you listen to this show. You know, you were talking about being annoying before, but also sometimes the people blocking your stories are pretty annoying, right? Like, it's endlessly frustrating when you've either talked to other sources or you've talked to colleagues and you know something is developing and someone is stonewalling you. That's also deeply frustrating as a reporter, right?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I generally have a pretty good relationship with, the sort of like press officers that you have to deal with. I mean, like, I think there's a bit of a I think there's a bit of like, sometimes I think there's like a public view on how clubs see transfer stories, which I think is not accurate, in the sense that I think there's like a perception on social media that clubs will brief out transfer stories to to basically look good and sell season tickets and
appease fans.
Was I actually think I don't think that's true at all, really. I
Really?
don't think I've ever encountered that in my career. A situation where like a situation where someone who's like a club press officer or like similar job, like doing club PR, will ring around journalists and say, "Oh yeah, we're really, really interested in like these 4 players. So why don't you put that on paper tomorrow?" I have never, maybe that goes on elsewhere. I have never encountered that personally. I feel like a lot of the time, like clubs, like if a club is really trying to get a player, I don't really think they want it in the papers. That they're like,
Yeah.
because as soon as, like, let's use Gallagher as an example because that happened this week. I'm not sure Tottenham would have wanted people to know that they were getting Gallagher until the point where it was close to being done. Because
no, I mean, the whole story with that, and I think you know what I'm going to come on to next, was that it was, Aston Villa deal done. Jack Pitt-Brooke is saying he's signed for Spurs.
Yeah, like I don't think that.
Well, David Ornstein as well.
Yeah, I think that clubs don't. I don't think clubs want their actual targets to be reported on, because as soon as something is out there, like obviously like a lot of this stuff will be known within the world of football anyway before, tons of stuff will be widely known within the world of football that isn't publicly reported by the media. But I think that if you're trying to sign a player, you don't want like the sort of MSM, for want of a better phrase, doing stories about this guy who you're about to get, because if that happens, then all of a sudden, like, other agents, other clubs, whatever might get involved, or you probably want as little noise as possible until you've got him in the bag.
Yeah, I'm interested in this element of social media, which you mentioned a couple of times. I mean, both you and I see all this kind of football quote unquote content, it's stuff just being churned out. How do you as a journalist cope with that? Because I think particularly in the kind of role you have where you report specifically on a club, people kind of come to see you as a conduit for the club. And I think sometimes you and your colleagues get attacked when actually maybe people are cross at their football team.
Yeah, yeah, that does happen a bit. I think that's always just like the kind of natural tension between being on, kind of operating as a fan and then operating as a journalist is that,
Mm.
as journalists, we're really, so in terms of like the work that we publish, we're very, we have very strong sort of sourcing guidelines, for example, and editorial guidelines at The Athletic. We take this sort of stuff very seriously. So, and a lot of our published work will be very, we kind of pride ourselves on being balanced, on being on how we our sourcing approach and so on. Equally, that means that we're not going to like come out with the sort of emotional hot takes that fans might do. Equally, if you're a fan and you're having your emotional hot takes because your team is rubbish, which is, totally legitimate way to live. Football fans kind of keep the football, fandom keeps the world turning round. Like sometimes you might read stuff written by journalists and think, why don't you tell it like it is? Why don't you be honest about how bad this is instead of like equivocating? And I totally understand that impulse.
Yeah.
I have been on the other side of that impulse, but it does sometimes mean there's a bit of tension, right? Because a fan might want the journalist that they read to take kind of emotional to have like kind of like nakedly emotional view on stuff, and then when we don't, they read it and think, well, that's just
That's
club
not your job.
PR. That's just club PR,
Yeah, yeah.
and that's a really common tension, I think, in
Yeah.
sports
How do you
journalism.
navigate that?
I think you have to. I think you kind of have to you kind of have to stick to your employer's guidelines. Like, ultimately, you are a professional journalist. This is my job, and my job is to work for the Athletic. And it maybe helps me a little bit that I'm not like a born Tottenham fan. I don't get like I get annoyed if they lose because it means more work for me apart from anything else. But if I don't
And you
like
have to go on a podcast
I
with
don't
James
yeah
and Danny Kelly moaning.
I don't take it personally if they lose. But yeah, I think as a journalist, like you can sometimes I've definitely done this myself in the past. Like you can get yourself in a bit of a pickle if you try to curry favor too much with fans, knowing that ultimately, like, you can't actually give them what they want, or you can't give them what they want while also doing your job well. So
Properly,
you
yeah.
can drive yourself a bit mad at saying things or doing things or like doing, and we all know, like, we've all seen this, like you would have seen this a million times. Like when a journalist will be tweeting stuff, which is clearly just like throwing red meat to the base, just trying to curry favor with the fans. And I don't know why you do it, because you want the retweets, you want the likes, you want the
Sure.
fans to like, you want the validation of being the fans being like, yes, you're speaking up for me, you're speaking for us, you speak for us, and it's tempting. Like, of course, it's tempting. Like, who doesn't love validation, Charlotte? We all love
Well,
validation.
why do you think I'm not even publishing this? I just do it so you tell me how fantastic I am.
But we ultimately, I think you have to kind of try not to you have to try not to kind of access that rich seam of validation. I think you have to kind of do your job.
Yeah. Yes, and it's hard. We're all human, right? Let's talk about the sourcing guidelines, because I'm a nerd that finds this stuff exciting. And obviously you're now owned by the New York Times, who have their very strict rules on this stuff. But the Athletic has always kind of had quite a high bar for things anyway, I think, even before the takeover quite a while ago now. How does that, like, for us to get a story published on say a transfer, how many sources do you have to have confirmed that in your guidelines? What are we talking, 2, 3?
So I think this is probably the sort of thing the company's quite open about. I think I assume I'm fine talking about it. So yeah, definitely multiple sources, and definitely high quality sources as well. Like you can
Yeah,
kind of, in football you can. You could hear, like, if you ask enough people, you could hear anything, any
sure.
number of times, third hand, fourth hand, fifth hand, sixth hand. But I think the idea is, or all the kind of guidance, the rules are that, yeah, multiple independent, credible sources to get anything published. and we do, we do take this stuff incredibly seriously.
Mm. Well, I mean, that's basically what the whole reputation is on. If people read stuff and it keeps not being correct, people stop
Well,
reading,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Things with like football transfers, it's pretty clear if it's correct or not because it either happens or it doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's a very clear, there's a very clear test for what happens, because you can just kind of see the real, look out the window and eventually there'll be, some player will, the manager will get sacked or not, like the player will get
Right.
transferred or not. So, and I also think like often with this kind of thing, like you'll do a story and people will get very. I've had tons of experiences where I've done a story and then people on social media get really mad. And then it's, you kind of get annoyed, right? When people shout at you, or I certainly get really annoyed, and I try not to take it personally. And then you just know that ultimately, like the events will bear it out. Like I remember doing a
Right.
story, when was this? March, I think, where I did a story saying, I can't remember the exact wording. It was something along the lines of like Ange Postecoglou under a lot of pressure, or Ange Postecoglou's Tottenham future in doubt.
Right.
They're looking at Iraola, Marco Silva, and Thomas Frank to replace him. And obviously, at the time, like, I wasn't the first person to do this. I think Matt Law wrote it in the Telegraph a few days beforehand, but it was obviously true. And then he, at the end of the season, he did in fact get sacked. And, Marcos Iraola wasn't at the very end of the process, but Marco Silva and Thomas Frank was the two-man shortlist at the end, and they gave it to Thomas Frank. So the story was correct. But obviously, at the time, you still have lots of people on the internet yelling at you because they,
We've all been there, Jack. We've all
that
been
that's
there.
just the way of the world. And but I think in that kind of situation, you have to kind of not get too emotionally invested in it and just kind of accept that if you're confident in your sourcing and in your reporting, which we were, then the events will probably back you up in the end.
How do you navigate the sourcing in sport reporting, particularly when you're only dealing with one club, essentially? Because, again, back to the politics comparison, in Westminster, everyone talks to everyone. The media, media reporting, the beat I cover, you try to talk to both reporters and executives, so you get a perspective on all elements of a media company, for example. In football, the players are very isolated and cut off from people. They're really, from what I can tell, kind of coddled. And why part of the reason why I love covering women's football in the way I do is because the accessibility is so much greater than men's. The access to the heart of clubs is much greater than in the men's game for the moment. So obviously you want to speak to the most senior people at a club. I'm guessing agents are a key part of your conversations. How does it all play out? Again, I don't expect you to give up your sources on a podcast, although you're very welcome. But it's just interesting how you navigate that network within the men's game.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think ultimately there's quite a broad range of people, and you might find that there'll be some contacts who are incredibly helpful on some stuff, and then will be maybe less helpful on other sources. But in terms of the people who I would mainly lean on, it could be a broad range of current club employees, club employees, player agents, other people close to players, friends, family, whatever, other people who work in the football industry, or other people who might be like one step removed from the particular person you want to speak to, or like professional PR people, of which there are an awful lot in football. So yeah, it's all about I think it's all about like kind of casting the net as wide as possible, knowing, getting a sense of getting to know your contacts well, and also getting a sense of like what are their strengths and weaknesses of contacts. Like, is there one, do I have contacts who are uh maybe like get a bit quite kind of, who are like really really good on detail, or there's other contacts I've got who are like maybe a little bit hazy with the details sometimes, and
But know the vibe, can do the
yeah,
vibes.
exactly. And so you've got to know, like, with some contacts, like, who will be, who can I absolutely take it to, who, if they tell me something, I can absolutely take to the bank, and who, if they tell me something, I'm like, oh, maybe, sometimes this contact is not so reliable on this sort of issue or whatever. So it's just a case of, cast the net wide, try and get to know people, being able to, I think a big skill in journalism is just like being able to sort of read people, I guess, like being able to understand like who like, and being able to kind of verify or just get a sense if somebody's telling you something, like, why are they telling me this? Like, do they
Yes.
have any do they have any in particular interest in this being published? Are they perhaps too
What's the
keen for me
agenda?
to know this and too keen for
Yeah.
me to publish this? And sometimes you kind of get the ick if you get a sense that like a contact is like maybe a bit too keen for me to run something. So yeah, it's all just it's that, but then that's the kind of process that you're doing all the time, and I think over time you'll kind of develop a sense of your contact base and always trying to expand it. And then who do you think you can trust the most, and who I think is most reliable in any particular circumstance?
Just to finish up on the transfer window, how do you, at a fairly traditionally run, I know you're online, but the Athletic is a tradition in its presentation. It's a pretty traditional style of media outlet. You get your multiple sources, you get your stories, you publish the story on a website that you want people to subscribe to. It could be a newspaper. How do you navigate that? And you know who I'm going to ask about, with the likes of Fabrizio Romano just pumping stuff out on social media. That's what they do. We all assume they have good sources. Who really knows? How do you compete in that world that we live in now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we've always at the Athletic, we're very, we obviously want. I think we have to. We stay very true to our guidelines and our values, and we know that sometimes other outlets might beat us to stuff, but I think that if we continue to always do stuff in the right way, then I think that will mean that I think we do. I mean, I'm lucky to work with some brilliant journalists and brilliant editors, and we do get, we get an awful lot of stuff. But I
Sure.
think we also try and if we always make sure we do things in the right way and we follow our rules, then I think that I hope, and I hope, I'd like to think this is the case, we will kind of develop a reputation for accuracy and for fairness, which I think will kind of stand us well in the medium.
Just to totally finish up the whole conversation, there'll be people listening who would love to do what you do. What does your week look like? Not a transfer window, but like a normal week in which there's maybe a couple of games that you need to cover and so on.
It's a good question. I do like be at home where I am at the moment a bit of the time. I will be in we've got an office in central London where I like to come into a few days a week. Not because I like massively need to, but just because I like being in an office. I like talking to people who I would not necessarily pick up the phone to chat with. I think is quite good. I think there's an upside to office work,
Hmm.
whatever sector you work in. Sometimes I will go to, maybe there'll be a game or a press conference. So the Thomas Frank's press conferences are at the Tottenham Training Ground, which is in suburban Enfield, like where the A10 meets the
Yeah.
M25. It's a very long way away from where I live in Peckham. Don't really know why I live in South London and cover Tottenham, but here we are. A lot of the time will be when I'm in London, I will always try and like catch up with contacts. That's the kind of upside of being in central.
Yeah.
A lot of
So,
people who work in football are in central
so like,
London.
so say Spurs play on a Saturday and a Wednesday, which is fairly standard at the moment. Do you get to chill out on a Monday and have a Monday off?
So if I'm doing a game at the weekend, I will take a day off in that week. So for example, tomorrow I'm going to Tottenham against West Ham, so I didn't work yesterday. And then next week I'm going to Burnley against Tottenham, so I will have a day off next week as well. Also, like a fair bit of my time will be spent either writing or just like thinking about what to write or talking to my editors on Slack or on the phone, thinking about like, what are we going to write next, write the week after? What are we going to write if they're playing well? What are we going to write if they're playing badly? An insane amount of my time is spent on WhatsApp and Slack. I think kind of far too much.
Yeah.
It's probably bad I feel like it's kind of quite profoundly bad for my brain
Yep.
to be on messaging that much, but here we are.
We're all the same.
So yeah, I think a lot of it is spent trying to. It's not just like the writing, and it's not just the talking to contacts. There's also a lot of time is spent just kind of trying to think like 2 steps ahead, 3 steps ahead,
Yeah.
just so that you're prepared for any eventuality. And of course, like in reality, you're not really prepared
No,
because
because
Daniel Levy might get like so like there are some things
everybody
that
shares
happen.
it might end up at Arsenal.
Yeah, there are some things that you can plan for which are Although some things will happen to Tottenham Hotspur or to any football club where you can plan for. So, for example, I mean, I don't think I'm giving too much away to say that when they sacked Ange Postecoglou, it's not like we were kind of caught off guard by that. Like everybody knew that this was happening in the sort of first week of June first week of June last year, and then eventually it was sacked, and then
Yeah.
we had this kind of big story on it, which was we were in a position to publish. But equally, some stuff happens which you're not prepared for. For example, Daniel Levy getting sacked in September. I think probably the biggest thing to happen to Tottenham this century, like, or at least like on a par with Bilbao and the stadium opening, or like reaching the Champions League final, like literally that level of like massive mega event. And sometimes stuff like that will happen, and you'll be
And it ruined your day at the cricket.
yeah, exactly, and you won't know, and you won't be ready for it at all. So
Yeah.
there's always you kind of have to be thinking the back of your
With all
head.
this going on, you're a passionate football fan, you're a passionate sports fan. Do you find, fan Jack and journalist Jack difficult to separate?
No, not anymore, because I feel like I'm not really a football fan anymore. Like I
Okay.
do love the game, but I'm not like I don't have emotional attachment in the team. Yeah, the team that I grew up supporting, Manchester City. I don't have an emotional attachment to them winning or losing.
I have more of an emotional attachment to it now than you.
Tottenham, like I have a bit of emotional attachment to Tottenham. Like I was very happy to the point of being like moved when they won the Europa League in May in Bilbao. That was amazing. I generally want them to do well, although maybe that's just me being a lazy journalist who doesn't want to try and figure out why they're so bad. So don't have much of during a tournament. I will like want England to do well. I cover the England
Sure.
men's team. I would love to see them win something. It would be a really cool like career thing to see England win. England left the World Cup or the Euros or whatever. But no, like in the main, no, I don't have. I think when I was younger, I used to have that I used to like have like a fan element of myself, but I feel like I basically don't anymore. So
Interesting.
I don't have to turn anything off or tune anything down. It doesn't really exist anymore for me.
You just enjoy watching football.
Well, some of the time. Not I did after Brentford 0, Tottenham 0 on New Year's Day. I had to call 111 because my eyes were bleeding so badly
Yeah.
after
No,
watching
you and me both.
Danso boot the ball into the clouds for 90 minutes.
Yeah. No, it
I came
was
away with a
pretty.
horrific headache.
Yeah. 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 Jack, it's such a pleasure to catch up with you and get an insight into what goes on in these rather crazy few weeks of the European transfer window. Where can people keep up with all your work?
Well, thank you so much, Amy Charlotte. It's been a pleasure. You can read me on The Athletic. You can hear me talk about Tottenham on View from the Lane podcast. I'm on X and Blue Sky and Instagram as Jack Pitt-Brooke Athletic, something like that. I've really, really enjoyed being on the show, so thank you very much for having me.
No, it's wonderful having you here. I'm at Charlotte A. Henry across social media. If you're listening to this and you're not signed up to the newsletter, head over to theedition.net and you can read all the old blog posts, newsletters, listen to previous episodes, and so on. And obviously, if you need a little January treat, you're not going out, you need a little January treat, why not pick up my latest book, Streaming Wars, and have a read of that as well. Jack, thank you once again, and I'll see you all next week.